Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Free-to-Play Summit at GDC. My name's Abigail Rindo. I head up the narrative efforts at King's Stockholm studio, and I'm here to talk to you today about narrative breadcrumbs and how they can help you guide the player journey through story-driven events. So I've been working in games for about 8 years now. I've worked on 20 different serious and mobile game titles in a variety of roles. And about a year and a half ago, I had a wonderful opportunity to come to Sweden and help the Stockholm studio at King with narrative design. I was so excited to embark on an epic new journey where I thought I would work on fantastic titles like Candy Crush, meet amazing new people, and explore astonishing new places and locations within Europe. Well, I did get to work on Candy Crush, and I did meet some amazing people, but I think we all know what happened next. After about 3 months into my role, the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and like many of us, I found myself with an overabundance of time at home. And also, like many of us, I decided to spend some of that time learning to bake. Now, I've always loved cooking, but baking has been something I've been traditionally pretty bad at. But after a lot of practice, a bunch of YouTube videos, and big failures, small successes, I did start to get the hang of it. And as I'm baking, I'm working from home like so many of us, and I'm trying to also think about narrative and Candy Crush. I've always thought about live games as a journey rather than a story with an ending, and I was trying to figure out what that Candy Crush journey might be. Our narrative team had already done some pretty amazing work on this. They had created a revised lore and story Bible that told the secret history of the Candy Kingdom. There was also an amazing character Bible that was filled with detailed casting notes, character relationships, and lots of backstory. All this was created to support a brand that was immensely popular with a really successful and long legacy. Our new challenge and opportunity was to figure out how to make all of this player-facing. So I'm baking, and I'm thinking about journeys while writing about a sweet and whimsical fairy tale world filled with candy. And I realized that with our events and features, we're leaving our players a trail of breadcrumbs throughout the map. Each moment of this bite-sized narrative builds that player journey, and our journey in Candy Crush has been a long one. I realized that I needed to get a full understanding of what that experience had been so far. So I asked myself, what is the trail of breadcrumbs that we've created for our players within Candy Crush? I began digging. I played the game. I talked to players, did some research, and talked with the team. And on first glance, Candy Crush is a whimsical and sweet world. It's filled with papercraft imagery and quirky characters. It's a world of escape where players can forget their daily troubles and have a meditative moment of sweetness in their day. But as I looked deeper at what we had been offering our players on a day-to-day basis, that world became less clear. The events we were offering would vary pretty wildly from day to day. If you followed a typical player experience in a week, it became apparent that we were throwing a lot of narrative information at our players through these events and features. but we weren't necessarily doing it in a strategic or coherent way. I discovered that we weren't getting the benefits that narrative can bring. Players were so confused by the messages that we were sending them that they just decided to ignore the content entirely. They decided that the story didn't matter. They didn't know where they were because they didn't know where they had come from. Now, this isn't necessarily an unusual problem in our industry, let's be honest. At so many casual gaming companies, there's this misunderstanding between narrative design and just putting text up on a screen. Often as narrative designers, we're given a game or feature at the very last minute and expected to fill in the blanks with flavorful and brilliant copy. But as much as I love writing, this method of adding narrative treats it as salt to add flavor at the end, rather than the core elements that actually hold the brand together and strengthen it. It's a missed opportunity in many casual games, and Candy Crush Saga and Candy Crush Soda were no different. Unfortunately, the environments and characters had become relegated to decorations that were entirely disconnected from gameplay. This resulted in our worlds becoming arbitrary for the player. Unfortunately, our characters had become interchangeable and generic. Players didn't know the difference between them. They were pattern matching our characters to features, rather than thinking of them as, people that they could help or friends on their journey. And because of this, the perceived value of the brand suffered. Even players that had spent years with the product couldn't differentiate between our main characters, and very few were able to tell us anything about them beyond the feature that they may have been attached to. Some people on the team saw this as a non-starter or even a non-issue, but I saw this as an opportunity. After all, I'd come to King after working on a game called Disney Heroes, which had some of the most memorable and amazing characters and brands that we have in the world today. I knew the strength of characters. I know the strength of characters. And I also know that our story world has tremendous potential. But I not only had to convince our teams of that potential, but just the potential of narrative and characters as well. And that wasn't necessarily an easy thing to do. After all, King has had tremendous success with this product for 9 years. Candy Crush is a deeply beloved game played by millions of people all over the world. It's genre defining. And it's a excuse me. And it's a privilege to work on. But teams were skeptical that narrative could add value to the game. I had to be convincing, but I also wanted to make sure and honor what had come before, while paving the way towards a future that would allow our players to have a deeper enjoyment of the game for 9 more years. So I set out on my own journey to find and evangelize the recipe for a narrative-driven event strategy for Candy Crush Soda and Candy Crush Saga. Now, like baking, both of these games seem simple on the surface, but they're difficult to master. Anyone that has played these games will recognize the sweet simplicity and appeal of Match 3. I had to take the core elements of that simplicity and use those elements to build sophisticated and coherent stories. To do this, I needed to create and hone a technique through dedicated practice and experimentation. Just like my adventures with baking, there were successes and failures, but each attempt got us closer to delicious results. Through this practice, I discovered that there are simple core ingredients for adding story to live events. And that when you combine that with masterful technique honed over time, something magical happens. So Abigail, what is this magical narrative breadcrumb recipe? Well, just like Candy Crush, our recipe begins with combining 3 sweet core ingredients, or as I like to call them, the 3 C's. Context, characters, and conflict. Each game and an event is different, so the amount of these ingredients is going to vary. It should vary. You'll need to experiment and discover what blend works best for you. But once you have the right blend of those ingredients, you can start to blend them in with your gameplay mechanics and event structure to seamlessly build the strength of the event and hold all of those pieces together. Like kneading bread to build bread dough to build strength in that dough. You need to seamlessly blend your story elements into your gameplay and strengthen those events to create deep and meaningful impact. So far, we've seen some pretty good success with this model. With the right blend of ingredients and technique, we've seen increases in both player engagement and spend with this strategy. Now, I can't share specific stats with you today, but what I can do is give you a trail of breadcrumbs to follow so you can find the right balance for your games. Our journey begins with Candy Crush Soda. Last year, we were presented with a unique narrative problem. The art team was changing the art style from a flat 2D paper cut to 3D. While we could have just flipped a switch to make this change, we decided to ground it within a deeper narrative context. To do this, we used live events spanning multiple months. First, we built anticipation around the event by having a mysterious soda storm hit the Candy Kingdom. By bringing the soda of Candy Crush Soda into the game world, we were able to contextualize the moment-to-moment fluid dynamics of the puzzles that the players had been playing for many years. Soon, this storm flooded everything in the 2D world, causing chaos and a massive soda flood. Our characters were suddenly presented with a difficult choice. Do they give up, or do they rebuild? Rather than give up, our characters decided to work together to save Candy Town. We challenged players to help the characters rebuild, which allowed them to take part in revealing this new, beautiful art style. This series of events not only helped transition players into the new art style, but it built hype around the game and the event as players speculated about what was actually happening in Soda. And as the players built the new scene, they were able to feel like they had a hand in restoring and revealing this beautiful new artwork. They felt invested. Once that town was rebuilt and the new style was unveiled, the players were then able to free the old 2D characters from their former paper backings. And they saw the brand new 3D ones emerge. All of a sudden, something that was a flat decoration in the game became characters that were filled with personality, that were alive and vibrant. The personalities started to come through in these fantastic animations by our animator. She's just so talented. And then the players became more deeply connected to those characters. They gave us great feedback, saying that this event allowed them to feel hopeful and connected during the pandemic. As they investigated the mystery of the soda flood and helped the characters rebuild, they were able to deeply connect with them in a way that felt related to their own situations. Players wrote really moving poetry, and they recorded video and drew pictures about the experience that they had. Our journey continues with Candy Crush Saga, where one of the first areas of opportunity we explored was the Saga map. So we wanted to contextualize the player's movement throughout the world, and we also wanted to introduce them and reinforce two of our most popular rewards, the Lollipop Hammer and the Color Bomb. We then raised the stakes by introducing a heist plot to the event. Bubblegum Troll uses the bubblegum pop blockers to blow up Mr. Toffee's vault. And then he steals an experimental color bomb. By building a conflict around these rewards that was grounded into the game world directly, we were able to build a foundation of understanding around the game's power-up boosters. And also, we were able to motivate the players to earn them. We tied the sequential action of the event directly to the level progression as well. And this synthesized the action and feeling of chasing a villain throughout the game world and along the Saga map, which took a Saga map that was relatively static beyond a few animations and brought a sense of life to it that was previously lacking. It all of a sudden felt like it was more dynamic and that anything could happen in the Candy Kingdom. After finding success with these smaller events, we decided to raise the stakes. With our Assaultnado event, players were given a specific call to action. Bubblegum Troll had unleashed a salty tornado on Candy Town and crystallized the buildings and characters. Players had to use the magical power of candy matching to save the Candy Kingdom. We used newspaper headlines to punctuate the stages of this event and the narrative beats to highlight the drama and the cliffhangers in bite-sized and highly visual ways. And while doing that, we reinforced the narrative with a salty scene that players transformed to sweet. They would complete levels, earning a magical sweet energy, and then they'd use that energy to free the buildings and characters from their crystallized and salty traps, revealing the sweetness within. I'm hoping that you can see the power of all three C's at play here. We started by contextualizing the gameplay and using the sweetness of the candy matching to influence and change the game world. We used our character relationships to drive the action and create motivation through emotional connection. And then we raised the stakes with a greater conflict that players had a direct hand in being able to execute change in. Our aim here was to give the candy matching meaning. We decided to take that experiment and explore it further in Candy Crush Soda as well, where we created a conflict in Candy Town by covering it in bubblegum as a way to reveal the newly styled 3D version of Bubblegum Troll. We wanted to make sure that we were blending context, character, and conflict even further with this event. And so we created a conflict that was specifically visually tied to the character and the gameplay and certain gameplay elements, and then made sure to contextualize the gameplay activities into that conflict. We used our themed achievement system to theme it around creating a situation where the player could remove the bubblegum and reveal the character. We directed the player activities through the progression system, which deepened the narrative and gameplay integration while also giving the player directed activities and giving them the opportunity to explore Soda and realize that there was always something fun happening. And because we made the unveiling of the character an event in itself and devoted an entire event's worth of content to it, we were able to introduce key character traits in a bite-sized and fun way that actually fit the play style without interrupting moment-to-moment gameplay. But conflict doesn't always need to be centered around soda floods, Bubble Trouble, Saltnadoes, we got to give our characters a break sometimes. So we have peppered some of these through with some humorous slice of life elements that are smaller parts of conflict. We recently experimented with integrating gameplay into our reward system by adding this humorous conflict to an event in Candy Crush Saga. In this event, we temporarily transformed our purple candies into hearts and asked players to help Misty the Unicorn fill her box back up, which had mysteriously emptied right before her big date. This charming slice of life scene gave our players a glimpse into a humorous moment with Misty the Unicorn. Now, don't let the simplicity of this event fool you. It was actually extremely popular with our players. We found the perfect blend of contextualizing the activity of collecting candies and reinforcing that by further metaphorizing a gameplay element. And when we combined that with a simple everyday conflict and the humorous use of a popular but lesser known character, we were able to find a blend of ingredients and techniques that really resonated with our player base. Thank you for joining me on the journey that we've had in Candy Crush Saga and Candy Crush Soda so far with our story-driven events. I hope you've been able to follow my trail of breadcrumbs. If you do remember anything from our adventures today, I hope you'll remember the recipe. Once again, it starts with the core ingredients, or 3 C's: context, characters, and conflict. You want to experiment with these and find the right blend that works for your game and for your event mechanics. But once you do, you want to experiment with your gameplay integration and come up with the right technique that's going to build the strength of your event and hold all of those pieces together. Remember, like kneading dough, blending all of your narrative components directly into gameplay in a deep, coherent, integrated manner is going to create this meaningful impact within your game, an emotional connection. If you can perfect your game's recipe, I think you'll find that story-driven event moments can lead your players on a sweet journey that will keep them engaged and entertained. I'm Abigail Rindo, and this has been Narrative Breadcrumbs. Thanks for joining, and I look forward to answering your questions.